so many American officials seem to believe what they watch on the news and assume that, okay, the Russians must be desperate. And now they're actually talking to the Russians directly, and they say, and they're just realizing, no, actually, they're very confident. And no, they're not desperate for, any carrot that we offer them. And they're not afraid of any sticks that we might threaten to wield. I think they're probably learning that right now. But it's clear that even they were beginning to recognize that. But this continues let's say the process of education.
Right. The amazing thing to me is just like, what is Europe doing? That the U.S. is going through this educational process, but European leaders are acting like Joe Biden was. But Joe Biden had the excuse of dementia and being 80 years old.
You're right.
Keir Starmer and Macron don't have that excuse.
Right.
So why?
Yeah.
Even if the U.S., like we said, the great leader of your Western hegemonic lord is being educated and learning this, you think that just by proxy you would too. You would start to understand and learn, and instead we have these, just hysteria coming out of Europe. Keir Starmer talking about sending troops, and Macron seems to. Where's that coming from? Why this reaction from Europe?
Yeah, well, it just, again, if Biden had been, or Kamala Harris had been reelected, we would see the same thing still coming out of the U.S. So these are administrations that were fully on board and are deeply invested in let's say the old narrative, which I think at the center of that narrative is a notion of Western supremacy. Not only is it, let's say, military supremacy and economic supremacy, but maybe most importantly, it's moral supremacy. This is something that they believe in very strongly. They think they're blinded by their own halos. And because they assume that they're this shining bright light, that anybody opposes them is a demon. This is, it's clear from the language they use that this is their thinking. And those administrations that are still in power in Europe, again, they haven't, but they're still there and they're still committed to the vision. And I don't think they're capable of giving up the vision. So they just need to be thrown out of office. I think that's the only thing. And there's a real chance because, already, even before Trump began his term, we saw there was a definite movement towards these populist parties in Europe. They clearly were, rising in power and threatening the establishment there. But it seems to me that what's happening in the U.S. now can only give impetus to that movement, and it's through them. There's a chance that we could see a real revolution in Europe. Now, again, it's just like the fight isn't over. I know. It's very thrilling what we see, but this is like the first round in a 15-round fight, and that establishment, though it's wounded, though it's isolated, still the establishment, and they can fight back like they've shown they have. They got all kinds of dirty tricks, and they just may become. I think I said in one episode earlier, it's just that they will become, as Vance was pointing out, increasingly authoritarian. That may be, that's the flip side of their obsession with moral purity. They can't let the devil take power. So therefore, they have to do everything, and they are morally justified in doing anything to keep the devil out of power. So we'll have an interesting fight on our hands there in Europe, and a fight that in some way reflects what might happen here in the U.S. too.
Mm. Well, what moves is Europe currently making with regard to the Ukraine-Russia conflict?
Well, Macron called together an emergency meeting after the Munich Security Conference, and he invited most European countries to it. He definitely left out Hungary and Slovakia, but oddly, he also left out Romania, the Czech Republic, Slovenia, and one other country that slips my mind at the moment. And they were saying, look, why did you leave us out? And the second time he extended an invitation to him because he's calling a second emergency meeting. But he again did not invite Slovenia. I don't know why. I don't know what's going on in Slovenia. Slovenia is not Slovakia. They're supposed to be on board with these things. But the meeting is an attempt to, I think, really to circle the wagons, to unify Europe, to make it clear that they're staying the course in their support for the Ukraine, the Kiev regime. And they're also meant to discuss the possibility of a European army. Now, I think all of these things are, this is going to fail. It's absurd. It's again, they're echoing or maybe responding to the call of Zelensky. In his speech at the Munich Security Conference, he went on and on about how Europe must unify. Europe, should create its own army, and that's what they seem to be, making some attempt, but they haven't gotten anywhere. I think after the first meeting, there wasn't even a statement. There was no agreement, and I doubt that there'll be any substantial achievement in the second meeting. So their initial reaction is just seems to me very just emotional and not thought out. They're not looking at the realities like, Hegg says they're the hard realities on the ground that you look at. Look, with the United States, who is by far the most powerful part of NATO, you were not able to hold the Russians back. The Russians have been advancing. Recently they've been advancing, of course, steadily for the last, almost year, about year in particular. Avdiivka fell in February of last year. There was a slowdown in January because there was an unusually warm month, and so you had a return of what they call the Rasputitsa, which is the mud season. It's a season of bad roads, and it just makes advances like anywhere off of a paved road very, very difficult. But that's changed, and the ground is hardening as they're getting a normal winter now in February. So in recent, like last week, we've seen some very notable advances. Well, in any case, they never slowed down. They slowed down for a while, but they never stopped advancing. And this was with, everything that NATO could provide, NATO, including the U.S. If the U.S. pulls out and it just becomes a matter of Europe, what are you thinking? If you couldn't do it without the U.S., how are you going to do it on your own? Let's just be honest.
So you think that they're not going to send troops? It's just all talk. Do you think that's it?
I think
it's
so,
just
yeah.
all bluster.
They really aren't.
There's nothing they can do, right? There's nothing.
No. It's interesting, like the only country that maybe could have sent troops that were really capable of doing something was Poland, and they've said they're not going to do it. There was even recently one of the Baltic states said, oh, no, we can't do that. We will support the cause in other ways, but we can't do that. So you just have France and the UK. But as we've pointed out, though, they have, on paper, they have some kind of army, not very impressive. I think 60,000, theoretically combat capable troops in the UK, and maybe double that in France. They don't have enough munitions to fight more than a week or two. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So they can't. So what are they talking about? I mean, the Russians know they don't have any cards to play, but they live in this fantasy world. Again, they can't really abandon the idea of being part of this, being in the garden, and as Joseph Borrell said, and being just superior to the rest of the world, able to, mete out punishments and rewards as they see fit. They're still living in the unipolar moment, but that is coming let's be honest, is crashing down around them. It's not just the advance of the Russians, but the great hegemon, the United States appears to be abandoning the cause. But instead of waking up, they're just retreating more deeply into their fantasy.
I mean, they got to feel kind of stupid, right? I mean, Keir Starmer and Macron.
I don't think so. I think Macron thinks he's a genius. Now, Macron's a clever guy, but I think he's so vain that sometimes when you're really, really vain, you can't see reality because you just kind of imagine that that everybody adores you, everything you do, and the truth is he's very, very unpopular within France. I don't think he's going to remain in office much longer. And Keir Starmer, I think, is just plain stupid. I'll be honest.
Really?
I think he really, yeah.
It's amazing. There's something fundamentally wrong with the Western political systems. If, for example, in the United States, the top person that DNC can come up with is Kamala Harris, who can't even do an interview unscripted. They can't even, like, how does that happen? And then you got Keir Starmer that doesn't seem to even know what is the state of his country. That they're just so out of touch with reality. It's just, there's something wrong with our systems, right? Why are they still wrong?
Yeah, well, I think it's the system might not be so much the problem, or there's certainly aspects of the system that are, but it's maybe not so much the system as the people. I remember somebody telling me, a philosophy student many years ago, decades ago, actually, that it's like there's no system you can devise that can't be undone by the demons. Well, his meaning was that in the end, everything does depend on reliable, honest, hardworking people, competent people. And and so you can devise the most, perfect system in the world, but if it's staffed with incompetence or with scheming, devious careerists and so forth, it'll come undone. And I think the problem is it's really just the quality of the people that rise to the top in our systems now. I mean, we don't have any statesmen. We don't. They're all non-entities, and what we have. It's just.
Does that mean we have to gut the system if it's completely infected with?
Yeah, or there just has to be or at least, I'm sure that there's changes that need to be made to the system. Yeah, but but I think more than anything, you just need a whole new, a changeover in personnel. I mean, you just can't. I think the people that are in charge now, both the elected representatives and the people that head these bureaucracies and probably staff most of the bureaucracies, they need to go and they need to be replaced. So you need a true revolution, and in Europe, and we're seeing what may possibly be the beginning of a revolution in the United States. Europe needs the same. Now, again, there's some reason to be hopeful. Right? It's just. What's happening in the U.S. The U.S. policies have a huge impact on Europe. Now, Trump in his first term, you're right, he was greeted with horror when he first took office back in 2017, but he was tamed, and then Biden took office, and I think there was a collective sigh of relief among the leadership of the European leadership. And they thought, well, that was just that aberration. It'll never happen again. But now Trump's come back, and he's really serious this time. And so I think things have really changed. That's why we're having emergency meetings. They realize, this is serious. And I don't think they've really even begun to come to grips with it. It's just they're in a state of shock and hysteria right now. And they're not thinking clearly, at some point. But just the fact of this, like I said, that just has to give ammunition. In the past, it was just like the populist parties really weren't helped much by Trump in the first term. Again, because he really didn't do anything, and then he was gone. But now, it's just like, hey, the hegemon has left us, and he's actually supporting the populace, and I would be very surprised if that doesn't have an electoral effect. That doesn't give a big boost to those populist parties in Europe.
Right. When you say that there needs to be a revolution and that we might be seeing a revolution here in the United States, what do you mean by revolution? Because it conjures up images of an armed uprising in my mind. Yeah. So what are you talking about?
Yeah. I guess it's a revolution within government, but it's not a true revolution, right? A revolution should come from the grassroots up. But I think you can make an argument that in Europe, you have these parties that really have do have coherent policies, have been very critical of the establishment and its its core policies for a long time, and they do have grassroots support, and they're building up. If they do win, and then they really carry out these changes, you could, if they do like just restaff these bureaucracies, which is I think is that they would have to do, if they can carry that out, it would be. I think it's. I suppose if you're going to be technical about it, it's not exactly a revolution because they're working within the system.
Right.
But they could really remake the system. There's a potential for that. Maybe the system's beyond salvation, and we might have to have a real revolution, which is always a messy affair and often doesn't produce the desired results. And in the U.S., yeah, I guess I'm using the term very loosely, but I guess what I just want to emphasize is not what we're seeing now is not the typical, Democrat. Republican alteration that I've seen all my life. There's a Republican comes into office or a Democrat comes into office and you're told, the other side always described him as a monster. Of course, the rhetoric has become much more heated over the last decade or so. But, it was supposed to be a real sharp difference. And then whoever came into power ended up doing pretty much like what was always done. That's what I've seen. Now, this is really the first time in my memory that I've seen in my, my lifetime, or at least since I've been aware of what's politics. And it goes back to like when I was 12 years old, where I've seen this, where there seems to be a fundamental, reassessment and redirection, old policies that were supposed to be core policies are being trashed. Like if you remember, I think it was during the impeachment proceedings against Trump, the first impeachment attempt. It was, I think it was Vindman, who was a Ukrainian American. He testified and he was saying like, well, Donald Trump was trying to go against our policy. So that is right there is a revelation of what we call the deep state. We could also just call it like the blob or the entrenched bureaucracy. There's a notion that, hey, this is what we do. In the State Department, and what does the president think that he could come in and muck around here? This is, and it's clear if you just look back over the decades, yeah, that's how it's been, and presidents have generally just accepted it. This is the first time where they're going in, and I think they're just in a state of shock. So that's perhaps it's not quite revolutionary, but it's just it goes far beyond anything that I've seen before. Again, it may fall apart, but like we said many times, they've already done something that was never done before, and I think they've just, the effects of this are going to be long lasting.
Okay. Guys, thanks for listening. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you haven't checked it out yet, please check out my website, nobliski.io. You can look at the pinned comment below. It's something that I think you'll find useful. Even my dad uses it. My wife uses it. Instead of Googling things, you should be using this website because you get access to OpenAI, Perplexity, Anthropic, DeepSeek. There's hundreds of models that you can use. It's what I use to create the thumbnail images, things like this. And the greatest thing about it is there's no rate limits. There are no subscription fees. It's free to try out and use. You get free tokens every day. So if you're not a heavy AI user, you will never have to pay for anything. But this is really my passion project. I really want to get it off the ground, and I think you guys would like it. So yeah, check it out. Let me know what you think. And if you have time to download the apps and give it 5 stars, that'd mean a lot to me as well. Thanks a lot.